Hey guys, this is Jake from 80/20 Media here. Today we're going to be doing a video comparing GM's 5.3 liter against their 6.2 liter V8. Both the 5.3 and 6.2 liter are part of the EcoTec3 engine family and have been used in the Silverado and Sierra 1500, as well as some of the larger GM vehicles since 2014. The 6.2 is obviously a little bit bigger of an engine, so it's going to have better performance and it's going to have better towing capacity. However, there are a couple considerations that you want to take into account if you're looking at one engine over the other. This video is going to cover performance, towing, reliability, gas mileage, and price between the 5.3 liter and the 6.2 liter. Now, we're mostly going to be talking about specs from 2023 as well as prices from 2023, and so this will mostly be focused on the newer EcoTec3 engines, but it is pretty relatable to the older models as well, and so definitely still a helpful resource if you're looking at a used 5.3 or 6.2 liter. So kicking it off with performance, obviously the 6.2 liter is bigger and therefore it produces 420 horsepower and 460 torque compared to 355 horsepower and 383 torque coming out of the 5.3 liter. With that being said, the 5.3 liter is E85 compatible, whereas the 6.2 liter is not. And the nice thing about that is E85 typically produces a good bit more power than traditional, regular, or even premium gasoline does. And so you do get a slight performance boost just by running E85 rather than traditional gasoline. Running full E85 on the 5.3 will produce about 380 horsepower and 420 torque, which does help narrow the gap between the two engines a good bit, especially for something that costs $0 to implement. When we look at performance modifications and performance potential between the two engines, both of them are naturally aspirated, and so there's not really a huge difference between the mods that you would use on either engine. But of course, because the 6.2 liter is bigger and already starts with more power, it's a little bit more power capable than the 5.3 liter is. Going alongside that and covering towing, because the 6.2 has more horsepower and more torque, it of course has more towing capacity. For 2023, the max towing capacity for the 6.2 is 13,300 pounds, whereas for the 5.3, it is 11,300 pounds. So there is about a 2,000 pound towing difference. The only note I would make here is that the 6.2 liter is going to be more beneficial if you frequently tow 10,000 plus pounds. However, if you're only towing 6,000 or 7,000 pounds or towing smaller things, you really probably don't need as much towing capacity as the 6.2 liter has. But again, it's up to you and what you use your truck for and whether you want additional power to make it a little bit easier to pull whatever it is you're pulling, regardless of how heavy it is. Now, with more horsepower and more towing capacity, you might wonder, oh, okay, does the 6.2 get a lot less gas mileage than the 5.3 does? And the interesting thing is they actually both get about the same gas mileage. The 5.3 liter gets 16 in the city and 21 on the highway, whereas the 6.2 gets 16 in the city as well, but only 20 on the highway. And so there is a slight difference, but it's a very marginal difference. These numbers also do depend on the trim that you have on your vehicle. Larger tires, bigger wheels, and things like that will impact gas mileage, and so part of it does depend on the trim, but overall gas mileage between the two is virtually the same, and there's really no kind of clear winner or differences here. Moving on to reliability, both of these engines are very similar. They're built off of the same engine family and therefore are very similar in design. Reliability-wise, both of these engines do have problems with active fuel management and the newer dynamic fuel management. Vehicles from 2014 until I believe somewhere around 2019 have active fuel management, and then the newer trucks have dynamic fuel management, which is essentially a newer version of AFM. AFM has been problematic since the start, and DFM has also been problematic in these trucks. The 6.2 and the 5.3 both have issues with lifter failure. I will note that it seems to be a little bit more common on the 6.2 liters, but also is a problem on the 5.3 liters. The biggest flaw to both of these engines is AFM and DFM. With that being said, for 2021 and even some of 2022, they did ship some of these without DFM because of chip shortages due to COVID. And so if you can find one that doesn't have DFM, I'd say it's a great pickup, just because these engines do tend to have a lot of problems with those systems. And as of right now, none of the AFM and DFM disablers on the market are capable of disabling 2023 models, but they should be there soon. So hopefully by the time you have one and get to a mileage level where DFM becomes a problem, hopefully there's a disabler out there. We always recommend disabling AFM and DFM just because of the problems that it creates. Outside of dynamic fuel management, there really aren't any major common problems with either of these engines. And so from a reliability standpoint, I'm going to call it a tie as well. Both of these engines should be easily capable of making it 250,000 plus miles on their stock block and their stock internals. So now with the 6.2 having better performance, better towing capacity, and virtually the same gas mileage as well as the same reliability as the 5.3 liter, you might be wondering, why would you ever get a 5.3 liter instead of getting the 6.2 liter? The biggest thing that this comes down to is price. The 6.2 liter is only available on the higher trim Silverado and Sierra 1500s, and that's the RST, the LT Trail Boss, the LTZ, and the High Country models. Now these are the four most premium models, and so if you want to get a 6.2 liter, you have to get at least one of those. Now the 5.3 liter is available on even the lowest end trims such as the WT work truck. So when we look at pricing, getting a 6.2 liter is a lot more expensive because you have to buy a higher trim truck. Now if you're already planning on buying a higher trim truck, the difference between the 5.3 and the 6.2 is only about $2,500. And so in that case, I absolutely recommend going ahead and getting the bigger engine just because you get better performance and better towing and don't really have any downsides from a gas mileage or reliability standpoint. But if you aren't looking at getting one of the higher trims, this is where the discrepancy in price is a lot different. So to get the cheapest 5.3 liter option, your starting MSRP is about $49,500, whereas getting the cheapest 6.2 has a starting MSRP of about $61,500. And so there is a $12,000 difference in between getting the cheapest 5.3 and getting the cheapest 6.2 liter. If you are looking for a more budget-friendly new truck, or you're not really looking to push 60K plus before options, you're probably better off sticking with the 5.3 unless you really need that additional power or that additional towing capacity. So to recap things quickly here, the 6.2 is the winner in my book. It has more performance, more towing, equivalent reliability, and the same gas mileage. And so it really is a win-win of an engine. Now, in the higher trim models, it's a $2,500 upgrade. I think that's worth it in my opinion if you're already looking at a truck that's that expensive. But if you don't want an expensive truck, then I think the 5.3, especially when you factor in that it can run on E85, is a very capable truck. It'll provide a good amount of power, and I think you'd be completely happy with it, even though you do have slightly less performance than the 6.2 liter. So at the end of the day, it really all comes down to what you need the truck for and how much you're willing to spend on it. With that being said, if you really do need that small performance increase from the 5.3 to the 6.2 because of towing capacity or whatever it is, you're probably also considering getting an HD truck that has the 6.6 liter gas V8 or the 6.6 liter Duramax. I would personally only get the 6.2 liter if I were going to get one of the higher trim trucks anyways, but I wouldn't necessarily spend an extra $12,000 just to get the 6.2 liter over the 5.3, because I think the 5.3 is a very capable, great engine that has some solid attributes to it, despite having slightly less performance and towing than the 6.2 liter. Anyways, that covers it for this video. If you guys appreciate this content, we'd love it if you subscribe to the channel, liked the video, and stayed tuned for future ones. Thanks, guys.